Emenda 4 Legislature en Guam is called to order. Before we broke, we approved a motion to place 262 and 270 on, and 262 is the first bill on the agenda. Do you wish to move on?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to place Bill number 262-34 as amended by the Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation on the third reading file and be afforded an opportunity to speak on the measure.
Any objection? You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 262-34 is a measure primarily intended to repeal the sales tax that was adopted several months ago. This sales tax has not gone into effect. It's scheduled to go into effect October 1st. This bill intends to repeal that so that the sales tax does not become effective on October 1st. With the amendment from the committee, it also repeals the sunset provision of the gross receipts tax increase that was adopted several months ago. As the author of Bill 262-34, I did not include a repeal of that sunset provision. However, the committee, through the testimony that was received during the hearing, has elected to include it in the version that was reported out, and that is now what we are entertaining on this session agenda. I just want to state for the record, Mr. Speaker, that my focus is the sales tax. If there are other opinions with respect to the sunsetting of the gross receipts tax, I think that's something worth discussing on the floor. But I want to stay focused primarily on the original intent of Bill 262 in my discussion, which is strictly the repeal of the sales tax component. Mr. Speaker, over the past several months as this sales tax was being deliberated, I witnessed, and the people of Guam witnessed, something that I thought I would never see in my lifetime. We witnessed this government literally take steps to put our people's lives at risk, to, for all intents and purposes, hold a branch of government hostage, all with the intent of forcing these new taxes on our people. As this body resisted that effort, the risks imposed on our community were exacerbated by the administration. They closed fire stations, they closed police precincts, they shut down sports and recreation facilities, and then they threatened the livelihoods of thousands of our government workers. At first trying to accelerate furloughs until such time that they were told they couldn't do that. And in all of this, the rationale was that this government somehow found itself in surprise circumstances as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that the federal government passed, and in those surprise circumstances had to resort to drastic measures. Having been the former chairman of the Committee on Finance and Taxation, and having very keenly observed over these years the way our finances are managed, I was from day one up until this very day, and continue to be, convinced that our financial circumstances are predominantly a result of our inability to manage the resources that we currently have available. When all of these threats were being carried out against our community, when our people were being put at risk by their own government, no new money was coming in. And even when we passed the law that raised the gross receipts tax on April 1st, still no new money came in. The tax rate went up on April 1st, but the revenue streams did not come in until later. But just the passage of those bills somehow miraculously allowed for those threats to go away. If the money wasn't there, and that's why they were being shut down, how were they thereafter opened up when the money still wasn't there? And immediately, you could see that the inconsistency that represented started to snowball. We started to receive word that was eventually confirmed in audit reports that the collections activities of this government fail miserably. So much so that it appears to be by design. And as more of this became self-evident, we started seeing the rhetoric ratcheting up, and the body eventually passed the gross receipts tax increase, the sales tax increase. I immediately introduced this bill, Mr. Speaker, to repeal that sales tax component because of those inconsistencies that were to materialize just weeks later. In line with the narrative, the queen on the chessboard, so to speak, was moved out to try and halt a repeal of this sales tax. That chessboard queen is the Guam Memorial Hospital, who in my short time here as a senator has been used expertly on this political chessboard to put our people tens of millions of dollars in debt, to layer burden after burden on this community, and to do so, parading out people in white coats, putting black armbands on their arms, and parking hearses out in front, saying that we're killing people if we don't give in. But over the course of all this, Mr. Speaker, something amazing happened. Our people, particularly those who are in the middle of all this, they stopped remaining silent. They started speaking out. And they said, that queen on the chessboard isn't a white piece, it's a black piece. That piece has so many internal issues that to use it to try and justify more burdens on our people is just adding insult to injury. And these individuals who came forward provided so much detail that it has literally upended the issue such that I have very little work to do on this floor today, because everything coming together makes the case all on its own. Individuals came forward, and the other critical component of our community, so vital to the exposure of the truth, latched on and did their job and have continued to this very day done their job to further expose what's really happening around here. And that is the members of our media who have captured and compiled these circumstances so expertly that to put them into a publication is so easy for everyone on this island to consume and understand exactly what is going on. And overnight, it seems, the chess piece that I've seen over the last 6 years that I'm sure has been moved around so many years before then, all of a sudden, that piece has been turned over. Today, Mr. Speaker, the financial realities of this government aren't just something that a single senator is trying to talk about. It's something that this entire community is talking about. The failure of this government to fairly apply the tax laws has become so egregious that there literally is hardly anything left to say but just to feel a really strong sense of disgust. Just several months ago, Mr. Speaker, when this body was held in here under special session after special session, we were told we needed about $70 million to get through the fiscal year. That it was nowhere to be found and that it just miraculously, vanished because of those the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from the Trump administration. Part of what was tried to be a compromise here on that was to require a $30 million fiscal realignment plan from this government, savings. If we're going to add burden because of this unforeseen circumstance, we must also have savings. That became a point of contention here on this floor. And ultimately, what was passed was a bill that would raise taxes on April 1st, raise them again on October 1st, and anticipate the administration transmitting their savings plan. Mr. Speaker, I don't know, and I don't know if you know, and I don't know if anyone on this floor knows, our media certainly doesn't know, and our people absolutely do not know whether or not that's actually been implemented. What has actually been reported is that during all this crisis, the administration was hiring $12 million worth of additional personnel. Is our government implementing those savings measures? It hasn't been mandated. Instead, what has happened, Mr. Speaker, is they rolled out tax amnesty, which I found to be surprising because that's something you should roll out before you raise taxes, not after. You don't increase everybody's burdens and then give an amnesty to all of the taxpayers who put them in that situation to begin with, but that's what happened. Recent reports have indicated that we're bringing in a projected $25 million in tax amnesty. Surprisingly, it's enough to cover the $30 million in savings this government was supposed to impose on itself. On top of that $25 million, we have audit reports and we have tracking showing that between $6 and $12 million in tobacco taxes alone are additional revenues that this government is supposed to be bringing in. We passed the tobacco tax stamps almost a year ago. I think it was in October. This government was supposed to adopt the rules and regulations to begin implementing that in January. They still have not. Rules and regulations to implement a tax stamp program on tobacco in order to ensure that we're collecting what we're supposed to collect. No movement on implementing that. And yet, surprisingly, the very same agency responsible for drafting those rules and regs has so quickly done so to implement the sales tax. So quick to raise taxes on our people, so slow to actually enforce them. So alarmingly slow that even on the front page of today's paper, a tobacco distributor has been exposed to owe $14 million in taxes and penalties just in gross receipts taxes alone. If you read the story carefully, it doesn't even mention the tobacco tax. Now, assuming of that $14 million just in gross receipts tax, assuming $4 million is penalties and $10 million is the actual gross amount, you divide that $10 million by 4%, which is the gross receipts tax rate, and that company made $250 million in gross income over that period. One company In lieu of collecting $10 to $14 million from one company, we have to entertain a bill like 262-34 because we're raising sales taxes on our people. We would rather tax our poor, our community's struggling, Mr. Speaker. We would rather do all of that than collect what's owed from a company grossing $250 million in income. It just makes you take a step back in astonishment. Interestingly, as you read through the story, that company didn't pay taxes in 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. It only got levied in 2017. How does a $250 million company all of a sudden get a way of not paying its taxes and only get levied 4 years later? And it got levied, but none of the assets were locked up. If you don't pay your taxes, you're not supposed to get your tax clearance to get your business license. I know that. I got a couple rental properties. Every now and then I get so busy, my GRT, I need to catch up on the filing. I never owe, but I have to catch up sometimes. And I always know that if you don't have that all together, you're not going to get your business license. How does a $250 million company not pay its taxes and get its business license renewed? And just on top of all of that, are they going to be held liable for the full $14 million? Or are they going to get the penalties and interest waived? And are they going to get a payment plan to be able to amortize the balance over so many years? Because you know why those questions are important? This kind of behavior grossly distorts the free market. If you're able to not have to pay $14 million in taxes over 5 years, that's $14 million in discounts or promos or other things that you can do that your competitors can't do. And when you distort the marketplace so badly, you're basically killing or strangling honest businesses for those that are able to get these kind of special treatment. And it not only hurts competitors, but it poisons the water for potential business and potential enterprises that might want to come in here and do business. You think a front page like that is going to make somebody want to come in here when they know that they're going to be up against that kind of unfair tax environment? We spend millions of dollars at GITA trying to grow the economy. We have a GITA administrator who is proud of racking up 1 million miles on flying on the taxpayer dime, the borrowed taxpayer dime, because that's actually borrowed money. And in all that expenditure and all that largesse, we just do these kind of things that are actually the most damaging to our business environment. It's like we're spending to do something that we're purposely trying to kill. It just astounds me. So between $25 million in tax amnesty, $14 million in that one company, $12 million in uncollected tobacco taxes, and $30 million in fiscal realignment, Mr. Speaker, that's $81 million. We didn't even need to raise the GRT in April if we just had things done right, if we just had things done fairly. So, when you see all these things, and you have all these other officials coming in saying, I don't understand why they're doing this, this is math. Mr. Speaker, this isn't math, this is corruption. And we should not tax honest people because we're unwilling to tackle these things. And we cannot, in good conscience, add to that burden out of fear of what might happen by a fear that's being cast by those very same players who are supposed to be doing this to begin with. The fiscal team, Mr. Speaker, includes the Director of the Department of Revenue and Taxation, who must have known since 2013 and surely since 2017 that we had $14 million in just this one company. And while they go out and say, oh, you know, the collections amount, that's just a false figure because these companies don't have that money, you don't gross $250 million and not have the money. One of the things we need to understand here, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about fiscal policy, is that with the exception of property taxes, every other tax is due to a revenue-generating event. If you owe GRT, it's because you sold something. Income taxes is because you earned something. Tobacco taxes, alcohol taxes, those are levied when you sell the product. So if we're going to be letting all of these revenue-generating transactions sit idle while we go out and try and tax more the people who are honestly paying, Mr. Speaker, it's one thing to do it at the $250 million company level and poison the business environment. It's another thing to do it to all of our people and just poison the community altogether. And that's what we will do if we do not repeal this sales tax. I remember when I was a little boy, I was very, going to CCD and everything. And I remember asking my parents one day, I said, what if you sin and you didn't know? Or is that something that you need to be all worried about? And I asked the priest. My parents said, talk to the priest, ask the priest. And the priest said, if you didn't know it was a sin, then you shouldn't worry about it. But if you do know, that's when you really need to search your conscience and make your confession. If we're still going to hold on to the premise that we didn't know all of this a couple months ago, we know now. We know now, Mr. Speaker. We know that there's $150 million in collectible taxes. A large portion, I'm sure, is concentrated in examples like this $250 million company. As a matter of fact, if you pull up the story on the tax amnesty, you will see that a large percentage of the taxes were business taxes. Corporate income, GRT, taxes from revenue-generating events. If we know all of this is out there, and we're still going to buy the line that that's just impossible to collect, if we're still going to believe that we just need to turn off everything and give GMH a subsidy because they have all these burdens and just throw your arms up because that's what we have to do, when we have people telling us that there's internal issues, 22 million lost in records alone just several years ago. We borrowed $45 million for their supplies that they could have used to fix their billing system, but instead, who knows where that money went? I just sit back and I ask myself, at what point does the evidence become so compelling that it is beyond a reasonable doubt? So, Mr. Speaker, I humbly ask my colleagues to support Bill 262-34. This isn't a bill to create hardship. It's not going to hurt anything this fiscal year. It's not even supposed to be effective until October 1st. The bill the governor sent down for special session to try and implicate that this sales tax is somehow necessary for CMS to get cleared up at GMH is, I mean, that's just the biggest piece of fiction I've ever seen, because that tax isn't going to be available till October 1st, so how is that even going to be used to correct anything up at GMH between now and then? It's just political positioning to ready our people so that they can blame that when they lose it. You know, people ask me, they say, man, you take your job pretty seriously, huh? They're like, you really just come out there and you really just say stuff. When you're given this incredible honor to serve, when you're given the incredible honor to be a Magalahi, don't mislead your people. Don't burden them and then let others get away with it. We want so much to be able to advance issues like self-determination. But when we grossly take those positions, Senator Magatlahi, the positions that our people would be looking to provide the leadership under those circumstances, when it does this, there is nothing any colonizer can do that's worse than this. So, Mr. Speaker, with all of these facts and with the gravity of all of those truths, let's repeal this sales tax. I'm still up in the air about the GRT that we raised in April. I'm of the mind that maybe instead of rolling back GRTs, we should just be increasing small business exemptions, because we do have a lot of large enterprises here that are not good corporate citizens. They don't help the community, they kind of just suck money out. But I think that that's something that we can either talk about now or have a discussion later. But one thing we definitely need to do right now is take all of these facts and all this truth, all this effort, all this risk that whistleblowers have taken, the awesome work that our media has done, and the realities that we know today. There's really no reason why we should not repeal the sales tax and spare our people this additional burden. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator? Any other senator wish to be heard? Vice Speaker, Senator Nelson, Senator Estevez, Senator Lee, Senator Arkin. Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the repeal of the sales tax for the same reason that I oppose the sales tax being imposed in the first place. And I agree with the previous speaker that at the time that this sales tax was being passed, this legislature was being faced with pretty much unforeseen circumstances and unforeseen actions by the government, you know, by people who are supposed to be acting in the best interests of the people of Guam. I believe that if we are going to consider a sales tax, it should never ever be under the circumstances that we allowed at that time. That to act hastily, to act under fear, especially fear. I think that's, if we're feeling afraid, then by all means, we should stop and consider what is causing that and address those issues before we proceed on putting any further impediment or burden on the people of Guam. At that time, it was very clear we were having a very difficult time getting facts on the table. Some agencies believed that they were above the legislature's power to obtain information and to craft solutions. And I think if we are going to repeal this, I mean, I am absolutely advocating for that, but I hope that we don't just repeal it, but that as a body, as a legislature, we learn a lesson, and we learn that we never, ever let agencies act as if they are above the rest of the people of Guam. They have to be held accountable. They have to be open and transparent, and we have to hold them to that. Those aren't just words. We can't allow them to come in here and say, oh, we just don't know. Oh, well, we're closing it because we want to close it. And that just cannot, I am just hoping that in addition to repealing the tax, that we are going to stand our ground as a body, as a legislature, as the only people really who have any kind of forum to hold the rest of the government accountable in the way that they should be held accountable. The only thing that we knew for sure, there had not been, prior to the discussions on that adoption of a sales tax, there had not been any kind of studies done on a sales tax, any long-term planning for a sales tax, any type of impact study, particularly how is this going to impact people. The only thing we really knew, and this we knew generally from nationwide studies, is that a sales tax was a regressive tax, that it would impact those people in low-income families disparately, more than it would impact those in other families or those in other people. For that reason alone, Mr. Speaker, we should have, at the very least, taken much, much more time to pass that and made a long-term plan as to how we are going to keep these families functioning, able to take care of themselves, able to take care of their children in all circumstances. I think, you know, we witnessed, and maybe we continue to witness things that created fear. And a lot of fear was being, you know, fear of furlough, fear of people losing their jobs, mothers and fathers losing their income and their ability to provide food for their families. And I just hope that we will never, ever allow that to be done again. Fear of people dying in the hospital because we are not passing a sales tax. I mean, how ludicrous is that, really? I hope everybody can see that I don't know. It's hard because in the end the bill passed, but it seems to me that we all have to work together. And we cannot just allow manufactured crisis or impending doom that all of a sudden was established and had not been you know, the subject of any type of concern by those who were in the position to address those concerns. The sales tax was in the end not going to be paid by the companies that were getting the tax breaks from the tax reform bill that passed in Congress. It was going to be paid by the people of Guam, by the men and women who have been working, sometimes more than one job, trying to sustain their families. Finally, Mr. Speaker, in regards to this bill, I would rise to a point of order on about page 4, on line 26. This bill, as reported out by the committee, adds it should be on line 26, a new section, section 8. I don't think, it must not have been reviewed by council because it should be a new section. It should be an amendment to an existing public law, 34-87, Instead, it looks like it's a brand new Section 19 being added to law that would establish a GRT 5%. But what in fact this new section is doing, Mr. Speaker, was something that was not heard during the public hearing that we had on the bill. This section, as written beginning on line 26 on page 4, this would affect the current GRT. And that was not discussed during the public hearings on the repeal of a sales tax. So I actually think it's not germane to this bill. And the other problem with it is that it's all underlined as if this is new, but really what it's doing is it's deleting certain sections of existing law, and it's not adding anything new. These are all provisions of the existing law. And so this sunset provision in the GRT, the one that was passed in Public Law 34-82 a few months ago by my colleagues and signed into law by the Governor of Guam, that said that the sales tax rate of 5% shall remain in effect until September 30, 2018. That was something that everybody on Guam knows. This GRT rate, the raise in the GRT to 5% was going to end. And in fact, I have family members who say, boy, I hope they repeal the sales tax and that, if they think if we repeal the sales tax that the GRT also ends at September 30. But this version of the bill does something that I think the public is not aware of, Mr. Speaker. They are not aware that by passing this repeal of the sales tax, we're actually imposing on them a 5% GRT beyond what they expected, beyond what anyone talked to them about, and beyond what pretty much the law had promised back then. And so I think we're really pushing their patience and their, compassion for what they thought they were going to sacrifice for in paying the 5% to, and I think we at least owe them that. So I would raise a point of order that it's not germane to the bill and that it be stricken. Mr. Speaker.
A point of order has been made to strike Section 19, line 26 on the bottom of page 4, and everything on page 5. On that motion, any senator wish to be heard? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to be clear, the original bill, as written by the primary sponsor, does not include this section that has been now substituted by the committee. And it includes on page 4, line 26, section 19. Well, even that addition is wrong, but effective date and sunset of business privilege tax increase. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule, or regulation beginning on April 1st, 2018, the business privilege tax rate shall be 5%. During the effective period when the business privilege tax rate is 5%, the Department of Revenue and Taxation shall adopt rules and regulations for the implementation and administration of the general sales tax established by this act. So now, Mr. Speaker, what this bill is trying to do, this section as substituted by committee, what they're trying to do is take away the sunset provision, which means the 5% is going to continue after September 30th to an indefinite period, and at the same time include rules and regulations just in case in the future there is a general sales tax established. Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of this motion because this was never mentioned in any public hearing, and I don't know what kind of wool we are trying to draw over the people's eyes. And to insert this, not to mention that this was pushed out just today, to insert this for us to address this issue is not give the people enough time to come and have a say whether they want this 5% tax. Essentially, that's what it is. It's a tax. If I make $1 million, I'm going to be impacted by this 5% tax. If I make $24,000, I'm going to be impacted by this 5% tax. So it doesn't matter what income bracket you're making, you're still going to be impacted by this 5% gross receipts tax because they put it on the consumer end for an indefinite amount of time. What I was hoping for, Mr. Speaker, that the chair of the Department of Revenue Tax would make steps to ensure that the consumer price index is fair across the board. We have seen products in our stores increase, and our people are having, including myself, and I'm sure a lot of us here are having a hard time making it day to day, just to purchase the things that we need to buy that are necessities. I am vehemently against this addition as substituted by the committee. It seems duplicitous and almost to an extent deceitful to the public because this was not properly heard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It was a motion, it was a point of order, and the chair can rule, and the chair rules that the point of order is well taken. As difficult as that is for me, yes. The way that it's written, it cannot survive. Yeah, it's well taken, it's not germane. Shall the decision of the presiding officer be overruled?
Just to be clear, Mr. Speaker, it's just to strike that section.
Correct.
No objections.
Parliamentarian asked me to ask. Yeah, there's no motion. Right. There being no challenge and no motion, the bottom of page 4 and the top of page 5 is hereby stricken as non-germane. On the bill, is it survived? Any other? On the main motion, I think the order was, on the main motion, do you still wish to speak, Senator Nelson? Senator Nelson, on the main motion, do you wish to speak on the bill now? Just on that? Senator Estevez? On the main motion, the bill as it is now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I don't think it's any surprise they've been vocal with regards to the sales tax. I did vote in favor of the sales tax originally passed, but I did so begrudgingly with a couple of assumptions. I had assumed there would be a good faith effort, and I had a lot of hope that we would work together with the executive branch to bridge the financial gap and to improve services and improve how we operate. However, Mr. Speaker, there were a couple of things that made me change my mind. And I'd really like to start with my opposition of the sales tax to begin with. Let's make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, the sales tax was a GRT in disguise. That's all. What we had done, as at least the way it was written, was slap on a 2% GRT onto the backs of the people and called it a sales tax. It's not good policy, Mr. Speaker. However, considering the other things that were in the bill in its original form when it passed, and with what I felt was at the time, a good faith effort from the administration to address exemptions and other changes to the sales tax to make it less impactful, negatively impactful to our people, and make it more effective. The law as it reads, Mr. Speaker, there are still huge problems with it. Up to now, we're months into it. I still haven't seen, I saw rules and regs that treat it just like the GRT without even addressing some of the fundamental differences between a sales tax and a GRT, like who's responsible for paying it. It's a joke. And I don't believe there's enough time left to address those issues. And so moving forward with a 2% GRT and playing a trick on the people, calling it a sales tax, I don't support that, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, you know, when we had committee of the whole here, and there were a lot of pointed questions to some of the directors and heads of agencies, I do remember some key points from that. Remember, there's a lot of discussion and concern about fire station being closed down. But then I remember the fire chief here, on the record. He explained that they didn't have enough firefighters to man the station. That when they were doing it based on overtime. And we've already heard time and time again the burnout rates for these government employees in public safety due to overtime. And so closing the station, to me, that seemed like a good management decision. It made sense to me. You don't have the firefighters to man a fire station. Why are we paying to man the fire station? Let's save money until we get more firefighters. And on the other token, you had the chief of police who told us this will have no effect on their matrix, that they will still be able to provide coverage throughout the island if the Hagåtña precinct was closed. And the work they had done with DOC to address some of the overtime spending by lending them personnel. I thought those were good management decisions, Mr. Speaker, that really alluded to the fact that we were going to be facing a fiscal shortfall. This body, Mr. Speaker, we made cuts. Every single one of these senators made cuts. I have a minority budget. My employees got cut, but you know what? We all had to contribute. But on the same token, as I'm cutting pay of my staff, and I only have 3, we see others get raises. And so it begs the question, are we in a financial crisis or not? I've seen the numbers. I know we are. But I think what's evident to me, Mr. Speaker, now is that without adversity, we will never evolve. We're never going to change unless we're forced to. And that's one of the most beautiful things about this island, and one of the ugliest things about this island is the resistance to change, the resistance to new ideas. I was really sad to see the austerity measures go away, as though the problem was automatically gone. And so yes, while I do have concerns about the financial crisis coming up, but I think it's going to bring out some of the worst in all of us, but I also believe it's going to bring out the very best. I think when faced in this type of challenging situation as a government across the board, I think we're going to find ways to be more efficient, find ways to get creative out of necessity. We evolve and we adapt out of necessity. And so while maybe we keep looking at the financial crisis and the cuts in taxes as a bad thing, maybe we need to look at it in reverse. There might be a silver lining to all of this. Everything is a double-edged sword. Nothing good comes without sacrifice. And I think it's time, as a government, Mr. Speaker, we make these hard choices. The executive branch makes these hard choices and sacrifice because the island is a lot more than the 5,000 employees. It's a lot more than the legislature. Mr. Speaker, I understand you removed the 5% out, but I'll be honest, I'm indifferent. $160 million shortfall, $120 million shortfall, it's a bit stressful, but we're going to have to face it. And I really am hopeful that creative solutions in moving forward are going to come out from both this body and the executive branch. And that's the type of thinking we need right now. We don't need to be thinking how fast we want to run back to our recliner. We need to be thinking about solutions and the hard work that we have ahead of us. And so I do stand in support of this bill, Mr. Speaker. I know that's going to make a lot of people upset, but my beliefs are my beliefs. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in support of this measure. I rise in support of the effort to repeal the sales tax. I voted against this measure as we discussed it on the floor, and many of us will remember the marathon sessions that we spent in this hall discussing and debating the sales tax bill. I voted against it, and I continue to oppose a sales tax. One of the things that I brought up when we were having these discussions was just the fact that I felt that this was a false choice. It was a false choice then, and it's still a false choice today. It's a false choice because the way that the administration jammed this down our throats, they made it seem like this is our only option. Hindsight is 20/20. We know that this is not our only option. Raising taxes on our people first, that was their first suggestion. Instead of going back, instead of attempting to improve collections or cut costs, raise taxes on our people. I said it then and I'll say it again. We need to exhaust all our other options, Mr. Speaker. This is a false choice. Going back to the idea of improving collections, and many of my colleagues have spoke about this already, I just want to remind the body that during our budget discussions last year, we talked a little bit about the Department of Revenue and Tax. They came to us and they asked for additional people in their collections division, additional people at DRT to assist them to go out and collect the taxes that were already owed. Some estimates were $80 million, $100 million, $125 million. It's a lot of money. And so we heard them out. We asked many questions about putting these additional resources into the tax collection division. They promised us, Mr. Speaker, that they would have these positions filled within 90 days. 90 days. Here we are almost 9 months later, and many of those positions have yet to been filled. Many of my colleagues, and myself included, we asked them, do you have people that are qualified for this position? Yes, absolutely, Senator. How long do you think it'll take to process these positions and make sure that these people are there doing the work that we're allocating this money for? 90 days tops. And here we are, 9 months later, still waiting for a majority of those positions to be filled. There's tax money out there waiting to be collected. And as a government, we are failing. We are failing. But we're going to jump on the bandwagon first, put a burden on our people, put a burden on working families, put a burden on our businesses, increase BPT, increase the sales tax, as if that's our only option. It's not. Improving collections is an important part in realizing some of those revenues. It was also mentioned by a previous speaker that we need to ensure a fair and level playing field. A fair and level playing field for all of our residents and all of our businesses. It's unfair that many of us are adamant about filing on time, about paying on time. And then there are some other businesses that don't have to play by the same rules. Maybe some other residents that don't need to play by the same rules. And it's extremely unfair. We also have the option of cutting costs. This body took a 10% cut on top of a cut already in our salaries at the beginning of this year. But the administration is still hiring, and they're giving out raises to their people. Unbelievable, I think was your comment. And it's so fitting for this scenario as well. Another option would be to create new revenues. And the governor and his fiscal team came down. He laid out a list of bills, other things that we might be able to tackle, and many of us did, myself included. I introduced a bill and I'm very thankful to many of my colleagues to signing on as co-sponsors to increase the registration fee for non-immigrant temporary workers. And for that money to go towards helping to create higher paying jobs for our people. There are lots of innovative things that we can do, things that we haven't yet tackled. So this sales tax, this false choice, this first thing that we want to run to before we exhaust all these other options doesn't make any sense. One of my colleagues, a previous speaker, had mentioned fear, the use of fear, and shutting down fire stations, police precincts, all under the guise of this fiscal crisis. Now they're using fear again. If we repeal the sales tax, DOE will suffer, GMH will suffer. We are now in receipt of a CMS report that identified some of the deficiencies and the challenges that they're facing at GMH. They're very quick to use our public hospital. To try to force us to make these decisions under duress, under the gun. Many of those deficiencies were not tied to funding. Many of those deficiencies are leadership issues. Leadership, Mr. Speaker, not money. The governor used fear. He said, if we don't support this sales tax, we should resign. We should resign from the people's house. This legislature represents the people of Guam, not the governor of Guam. They used fear to get us to do this. This bill passed, and they continue to use fear as a tactic. The people of Guam place their trust in us as their elected leaders, as their representatives. I'm glad that that provision, the last section, was stricken. And I thank the Vice Speaker for noting it. This change with the BPT at 5% was not publicly heard. The people of Guam trust us. As was mentioned earlier, many of them are so busy just trying to make ends meet, rushing from one job to the next, trying to feed their children in between, living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. Sometimes, in many cases with these working families, they don't have the time to watch our every move. But many of them vote for us, and they just hope and pray that we will do the right thing. Repealing this sales tax is the right thing to do. Many opportunities come before us, and we need to remind ourselves about the public trust and continue to earn that public trust. And then we need to get to work on improving collections, on cutting costs, on figuring out ways to generate additional revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Agon? After Senator Agon, any other senator wish to be heard?
Buenas tardes, Mr. Speaker and fellow colleagues. You know, much has already been said in regards to the repeal of the sales tax, and I just wanted to stand here and once again highlight my support for the repeal of the sales tax. You know, I had a conversation with an individual who is very close to the process of the tax collection, especially as it relates to the tax amnesty. And one of the questions that I posed to this individual was, did the government really have to go take that route rather than aggressively pursuing the collections of outstanding tax receivables? And the response was no. If they had the additional resources and personnel, they would have been able to collect it. And the message I'm trying to get to, Mr. Speaker, is that in a matter of 2.5 months, because of this tax amnesty program, approximately $25 million will be collected, exclusive of any penalties or interest that's assessed. And I bring this up because there's a particular category there, Mr. Speaker, and it's the real property taxes. And where does the real property tax go to? It's deposited into the Territory Education Facilities Fund, a special fund specifically to support education and related services. Mr. Speaker, as of the date of the Special Economic Service, approximately $500,000 was collected out of the real property taxes. Not even a week prior to that SES, the Superintendent of Education was instructed that there were no revenues allocated specifically to begin the A&E and the AOE process for Simon Sanchez High School. They already collected $500,000, which is above and beyond their initial projection. And the final figure, based on total anticipated collection on the real estate, would have been $1.1 million. That could have been given to DOE specifically to begin the process of the reconstruction of Simon Sanchez High School. That's one example, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we also talk about, and the media has done an excellent job in maintaining transparency with regards to the use of special funds that are not authorized by law, but this administration has tapped into the use of special funds repeatedly to augment general fund operations. Madam Speaker, I'm bringing these things up because it comes down to telling the real story. Rather than going out and asking our people to bear the burden of a 2% sales tax above and beyond what you're paying for every single day today, Madam Speaker, it comes down to cash management, and it also comes down to tax collection. Already that has been highlighted by a number of the previous speakers. And what's interesting is back in February, and I'm going to highlight this figure because individuals were under oath, and they said at that time there was approximately $180 million of outstanding tax receivables. It really comes down, Madam Speaker, whether in fact we as a government have the fortitude and the desire to make sure that we put our people at the forefront. Let's not ask our people to bear the burden of taking some of their hard-earned money, giving it to this government so that we can continue to operate status quo. And when I say status quo, Madam Speaker, as of late April, since the beginning of this fiscal year through late April, this administration hired 223 additional personnel, committing approximately $6 million in payroll obligation to this government of Guam, and most especially to the taxpayers. But that's not it, Madam Speaker. With the exception of essential positions such as law enforcement, educators in the classroom, and professional and certified healthcare providers, Madam Speaker, since the latter part of April through sometime in June, there was an additional hiring spree of approximately 181 individuals. 404 people hired since day one of this fiscal year. That's why I ask, is there a fiscal crisis? If there is, in fact, a fiscal crisis, then let's make sure that we contain costs and only essential positions be filled, because that's the expectation of our people. Educators in the classroom, police officers out in the streets, first responders being recruited, certified nurses, as well as medical physicians, essential positions for the operations of this government that fall into the category of education, public safety, and healthcare. That should be the mindset that we have in terms of expending resources, especially, Madam Speaker, in light of the statement that was presented by Speaker Cruz during the SES. He said that he anticipates, based on OFB's numbers, that anywhere from $120 to $140 million, I believe, plus, that this government may realize a cash shortfall. If that's the case, then we need to continue to look for ways in which we can only stay with hiring essential personnel and making sure that areas such as the education, public safety, and healthcare are the priorities. And it was mentioned about hiring personnel at Revenue Tax. Yes, that's another area that certainly have requested in certain divisions that they get reinforced personnel so that they can carry out their responsibilities. But then again, Madam Speaker, it comes down to our people. Today, our people are feeling the pinch. Our people are being affected today. And let me give you two examples. Since December of 2017 to date, the regular price of fuel, gas, has gone up by 10.2%. A particular product that I purchase on a regular basis has gone up since February to last Saturday by 13.9%. These increased costs is affecting the everyday families out there. Now they're going to have to forego spending money for some of the things they would rather or otherwise spend on caring for their family or taking care of the children, taking them out to lunch or taking them to purchase or to enjoy certain things that they otherwise could have expended their money on. It's our people that we are here for, Madam Speaker. And we need to recognize that. So in this light, I stand in support of the repeal of the sales tax. Let's not burden our people any further, Madam Speaker, but let's do what our government is tasked with doing. That's collecting our tax receivables aggressively, and that is making sure that we hire only for essential positions and that we allow the use of special funds for the purposes that they are designated for. Let's not increase the cost of living on Guam, because it's not only affecting our families, but it's also encouraging, or I don't know if that's the correct terminology, but it's allowing our families to transition and to move elsewhere, to move off island because of the increasing costs. And we have always been here about our family and taking care of our island community, and we need to continue to do that, even if in fact it requires making difficult decisions. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, Speaker Cruz, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as a legislature, we really have only two major responsibilities. One is to provide advice and consent to the appointments of the Magotlahi, and we have many of those appointments today that we're going to be addressing. And the other is passing a budget. Those are the only two. Everything else really is just other things that we could be doing to make Guam better. My concern, Madam Speaker, and I think I sent you all dear colleague letters, and I thank the retiring speaker for making mention of the fact that the loss to the general fund is real. I don't know how to further say it. It really is real. I agree that sometimes we get mixed signals. One day we're at the precipice of a cliff and we're falling off it. The next day we have a surplus. One day we're closing precincts and fire stations. The next day we're hiring 400 additional people over there. It really is difficult, but the thing is that the loss is real. The Trump Tax Act did cost us, and one of the few times that BBMR and the Office of Finance and Budget has agreed is it's a $120 million loss. Just that. I said it may be even higher because there are other things that OFB and BBMR does not agree on. Last year, we had a near knockdown, drag-out fight over how much was the Section 30. Was it 78 or 68? Was the federal government going to take the 10 for the war reparations? Was it not? I'm glad I was wrong last year that they didn't take the 10 million out last year. But then for this year, are they going to take the 10 million out since the awards are supposed to be, the compensation is supposed to be coming out next month. Will they start taking out the 10 to pay for it? Will they take the ones that for last year's? And we also have to recognize that Section 30 is withholding tax of all the military and federal employees that are here. So that 20% reduction that we saw in the withholding locally, we should also anticipate a 20% cut in the Section 30. Not counting what was going to be, what or is or may be taken out for the payment of the war claims. So that could be either another $20 million right there. A little more. Then, over the last 4 years, since I assumed the chairmanship of the Appropriations Committee, all of you, and I thank all of you, for siding with me when I've taken on the administration about their aggressive business privilege tax projections. 1 year, you thankfully supported me in a $27 million cut from their revenue projection. And we were very close when the year finally ended. The public auditor criticized us for over-projecting, but it would have been ridiculously high had we not supported each other and reduced the business privilege tax projections. This year, again, the Office of Finances and Budget does not agree with the administration's projection for business privilege tax. So the combination of the 120 on the Trump Tax Act, the loss in Section 30, just from the Trump Tax Act, not including the possibility of the war reparations being taken out, and the difference in war claims is why I said 160. So I understand the objection to the sales tax and burdening the people, but I don't know how else we're supposed to collect money. How are we supposed to raise the revenue? No withholding taxes? Because that burdens the people? It has to come from somewhere. And all of you attended, well, most of you attended the public hearings. You saw what happened in the public hearings between option 1 and option 2. I mean, option 2 I wasn't even considering during the public hearings because I knew that was just too gross. But for option 1, one of the first departments we got was OTEC. Just to make their option 1 meet the ceiling that they provided so they could say that they had a balanced submission to us, stripped everything, provided nothing. There's no way that OTEC could possibly come into the 21st century with the budget that they were provided. Those of you that attended the last week of hearings, Department of Corrections came in and they had a budget that they presented to us, but it was without providing for fixed cost like feeding the inmates. The Department of Behavioral Health and Wellness came in and didn't provide for the payment of their contractual obligations to residential care for the children that we have off island, didn't provide for any of the residential care that we have for them on island, but they came in under their ceiling, and the total set was balanced But we're going to have to find that because there are fixed costs that we have to find. So I'm not saying that I support a sales tax because I understand, and from friends in the tourism industry, that there's major opposition to a sales tax. And the implications that it'll have. It's not that the poor haven't not been paying any tax. The GRT has just been an invisible hidden tax. But it was the way that we collected. So all I'm saying is, well, do what you need to do. I did what I needed to do when the motion for on the 5%, as painful as that was, it was the right thing to do because the way that it was written and how it was done. But I know that that's going to cost $60 million, and I've been anguishing with my OFB staff trying to figure out how to balance. Just if we were just to take just warm bodies, it's $450 million. Just warm bodies. That's without increments. Department of Education by itself is $175 million for just their operations. The university, the courts, their budget is virtually 60 by itself. The Office of Attorney General is 13 mil. So we're going to have to find some way to get a budget out. And I purposely had a hearing for every single agency and invited everybody to attend. Because I wanted everybody to attend and listen and tell me where you think the fat is. To remove the deputies would only save $1 million. I now have to find 159. So I understand, and I don't begrudge anybody's. We have to do the right thing in the way that we vote today. And so, but I ask all of you, you're going to need to help me go through, and all of the testimony is up on you. If you want, I can send it to you in hard copy or whatever, but look at it. Because we're really, yes, it sounds great that we're going to cut, but tell me where you're going to allow me to, you think you're going to be able to support cuts. Do we take the OPA's recommendations that she's been coming out with? Who's going to make the first motion on this floor with her last audit? We're going to say $5 million for every 5% we make the government increase the contribution of health insurance. Who's going to sponsor that? She's had a recommendation on how to be able to deal with non-performance pay in fire department. Who's going to sponsor that? There are some real tough times ahead, and I'm just telling everybody, regardless of what kind of spin they try to have every other day from across the street, I assure you that the revenue loss is at least 120 and probably closer to 160, if not more. And this last year, we were only off a little bit in our projection, and I thank all of you for standing with me and the committee in our recommendation of bringing down the revenue. But we were very close. We were within 2%. And actually, if those departments had received the money that we appropriated to them, to the university, there would be no surplus, but we would have been exactly on point, on target. So I understand what needs to be done today. I'm not in opposition to it. I just want us to all recognize that there is a real financial shortfall in revenue. And I ask for all of your assistance in coming up and reviewing all the departments of where you think we can cut, what you think we can put back on, because they've made some artificial cuts. To not fund the feeding of the prisoners was a false cut, if there was ever a false choice. And there's many of those that need to be added back on. We want efficiencies, but we can't fund OTEC. I mean, they were even going to cancel the AS400 contract. It was unfunded. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, I had sent all of you a dear colleague letter. And I thank all of you for reviewing it and understanding where we're at. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill, Senator Morrison, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do want to thank the previous speaker for the budget chair for all his work, and appreciate all the SES meetings that he's called and gathered all the experts to provide us the information we need. Madam Speaker, although I have stated publicly that I'm considering a support for repealing the sales tax provision, I'm also concerned that whether this legislature has any real plan going forward to address, as a previous speaker, our budget chair has mentioned, a real shortfall. Certainly, we've been trying to figure out, or at least some of us have been trying to figure out how to provide a dedicated funding source for GMH, DOE. I think things got lost in the mix. Even prior to the Trump tax cut, and all these challenges that we've also, if you all recall, the Army Corps engineers report of the Department of Education's deferred maintenance, what costs this government up the tune of $90 million. And that occurred in 2013, and we still haven't figured out how we're going to address our schools throughout this island and what type of support to address that the Corps' deferred maintenance plan. Mr. Speaker, you pointed out just one area alone. When DOE came down there and presented their budget, aligning it to what we call as the every child is entitled to an adequate public education, the 14 points, clearly they outlined the overall cost to ensuring that we follow the law. And it seems that this body is certainly going to have challenge trying to address that law or the 14 points. I don't need to spell out the 14 points, but it's clearly outlined, and at least for me, it's the first time I've seen the figures attached to every point if we were to follow the law. And that's going to be a real challenge, Mr. Speaker, going forward. Again, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate you calling those SEH meetings. It's very clear for some of the statements there, but I want to point out one that is that was very, very or shared with us at the meeting, and I think our public needs to hear this. During the special economics hearing or meeting held on June 22nd, 2018, Mr. Gary House, Chief Economist at the Guam Department of Labor, stated, "The projection on the employment and wage component which feeds into GRT as employees spend the wages and income tax withholdings appears reasonable based on current law. However, if the sales tax was removed and not replaced with something else, and there was a 120 million shortfall that required reductions in work hours or layoffs, then employees' wages would decline significantly enough to adversely affect the economy. And that will remove the growth in the economy." So, Mr. Speaker, our public services, our economy for that matter, it certainly would be impacted. As pointed out, some of the information that if we were to not find a solution to address this shortfall, we must be very mindful that we'll just have to ensure that our people are aware that there'll be no alternatives to, as pointed out here, having to let go people. And that is also a real issue, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. I understand, Senator Rodriguez, did you wish to be heard? You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment that legal counsel is reviewing now, but I can perhaps speak about it first, if that's okay, or you want us to wait till I get the amendment?
Why don't we just take a short
Okay.
break and have it circulated so that nobody questions it? Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of Bill 262. Just like some of our colleagues here, I was very much against implementing a sales tax and increasing our BPT to at least temporarily from 4 to 5%. However, I remember during those discussions, Mr. Speaker, that I've acknowledged, and just like some of our colleagues have acknowledged here this afternoon, that, and just like you did too, Mr. Speaker, as Chair of Appropriation, acknowledged that there is a real shortfall that our government is experiencing now and will experience even greater in the next fiscal year. And so I know that there's a bunch of initiatives that you and others have put forth on the table to address how we can kind of offset some of those shortfalls that we anticipate. But for now, Mr. Speaker, we know that this sales tax, the implementation of a sales tax, was really to address three very important aspects of our government. The 1% was to offset the shortfall of the Trump tax cuts. That was 1% that would address that. 0.75% of the sales tax would have addressed the need of the Guam Memorial Hospital, and 0.25% would have addressed the need for the Department of Education. And really what has been in the forefront this past few months and more recently this past few weeks with the issuance of the report, the CMS report for the Guam Memorial Hospital, was a real need for us to be able to provide funding sources for the hospital. And you know, although this current law that is being repealed now would have provided resources for the hospital, for us to repeal that, which I believe, and it seems that it is going to be repealed by this body, it leaves us back to square one in terms of the hospital. And Mr. Speaker, I want to ensure that we separate the two issues here. One issue is the issues we have with the management of the hospital and the mismanagement and the concerns we have with what's happening at the hospital. But there's also that issue of there is the real need for them to receive additional funds. And what we appropriate to them, you know, both you and I know, Mr. Speaker, is really not enough to offset those that come to the hospital, that get treated there, and don't have the ability to pay, but yet we're still, as a government, having to fund those. And so I believe, Mr. Speaker, it's responsible for us to offer a solution, an option, if we're going to repeal this sales tax. And so one of those options I'd like to propose, Mr. Speaker, is, and this is not new. These amendments that I'm proposing, which is to tax the banking industry the same way all other industries are taxed on their gross receipts, and to establish a 4% fee on health insurance premiums that are paid, is nothing new. The governor himself has proposed this on Bill 230-34. This was both items have been publicly heard in that bill. I believe we've also tried to address it in another bill during the time we were in special session numerous times a few months ago. And so if we institute these two, Mr. Speaker, these two amendments on taxing banking on their gross receipts and the implementation of a 4% health insurance premium fee, this would address about $20 to $30 million. And it happens to be the amount that is that we're anticipating from this sales tax if this sales tax was to move forward. And so it's important, Mr. Speaker, that as a body, I've heard some of our colleagues say, if we repeal this, we got to roll up our sleeves and work harder to find a solution. And so I know it's not something that is hasn't been popular in here, But I haven't seen from this floor here, we've heard it outside in the media on how perhaps taxing banking this way is not the right way to do it, but not in here, Mr. Speaker, where these discussions are being had. I haven't seen anything compelling for me to withdraw this push to get this industry to get taxed just like any other industry on Guam. And so I'm asking my colleagues to seriously provide due consideration to this proposal. It's a way for us to address the need of the hospital. The last section of this amendment, Mr. Speaker, specifically allocates the resources that we're to receive from the banking and from the health insurance to GMH for capital investment, operational requirements, reserves, and to address deficiencies noted by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the Joint Commission reports of 2018. And so this is one way that I truly believe that we can address the needs of the hospital if this is able to pass this body. So I ask my colleagues for their consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As tempting as this looks, and as much as I really appreciate the fact that we are trying to find a solution, I really do think that we have to comply with our standing rules. And I cannot find this as having been heard in 262. Admittedly, we may have heard it in other things. If you introduce this today as a separate bill and schedule a hearing for next Tuesday, I will have a session following on Wednesday or Thursday to take it up because we need the revenue. But I cannot allow this to just be dropped into 262 the way that it was heard. But I stand to be overruled by the floor, but I already ruled one out. I just want to be consistent with our rules and with my rulings, and I'll rule this out of order. But I am open to being overruled. If somebody wishes to move, that the ruling of the chair be.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, and with all due respect, Mr. Speaker, and you know I hate to do this, but I would move to a motion to overrule your ruling. I believe in the past it's been done, although it hasn't been heard on 262, because of the seriousness and in our need and our desire, all of us desire to kind of address the situation on the shortfall. I want to just ask again my colleagues for their consideration, because we did have a hearing on this on another piece of legislation. There has been public support from this from the executive branch. The governor actually introduced this in Bill 230. So I'd like to, with all due respect,
I invited it.
Thank you.
There's been a motion to overrule the chair. All those in favor of overruling the chair's ruling, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. On the main motion, Bill 262. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Nicholas, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleagues for their input. I thank you for your input, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the budget. Something needs to be made very, very clear, and that is that when we're going to be addressing the finances of this government, it needs to be done from the big picture. Failure to do that means we're going to run the risk of overcompensating on one end or undercompensating on another. For example, Mr. Speaker, when we have these kind of egregious collection issues, they create a false sense of shortfall because the money wasn't there, therefore we believe that we don't have the resources, therefore we believe that we need to raise taxes in order to make up for them. If we're not enforcing the existing laws that we have, how can we go out and add more burden to our people? That is the underlying issue here. If we're not getting the management up at GMH to address the issues that are causing it to have such chronic losses, how can we just turn our backs to that and just dump more burdens on our people? The reason why we have the checks and balances in government where the legislature approves the budget and the governor's office is supposed to execute it is because we're supposed to be able to, through the budget process, make sure that we're not just writing blank checks while management practices aren't being implemented for the best interests of the people of Guam. If we were to be able to implement better collection procedures that are more fair and realize not only the increased revenue from that, but the economic benefits of having a level playing field, if we were to implement proper management practices at GMH and realize not only the higher revenues from being able to bill more, but the lower losses from having much more competitive contractual arrangements, if we were to do all of these different things and bring down the cost burden while increasing the revenue stream, then the subsidy wouldn't need to be 2%. That's why it's very important that we are careful not to put the cart before the horse. We can either increase the subsidy by creating another 2% tax and not fix those problems, or we can fix them and get to a true figure. That's where this administration needs to meet us halfway. All they've done, their modus operandi has always been bring in people, say it's a crisis, say there's not enough, and demand more. If you fix what's not working, if you collect what's not being brought in, we won't need to increase things as much. And that is where the checks and balances will create a government that works for the people. If we're just going to respond to what they say is our shortfall without having them correct the internal issues to mitigate the impact of that shortfall, we are being as much of a part of the problem as they are. So, repealing this sales tax, Mr. Speaker, I agree with you, is step one. But I don't think that step two should be immediately to try and find a substitute revenue source, a different tax, a higher fee. I believe that the immediate step after this is for management to come back, which they supposedly did several months ago when this whole thing started with a fiscal realignment plan that I still don't think has materialized. Management needs to come back and not only determine how they're going to truly implement the fiscal realignment plan, but also be upfront about these problems up at GMH and how they're going to fix them internally to reduce that cost burden. They need to be upfront with these collection items. All they say is, oh, we can't collect, those businesses don't have money, only come to find out today that that's not the case. And that's just one example. That's just one business out of $150 million on outstanding liabilities. If you break out the numbers on the amnesty, it comes out to an average of $20,000 in taxes not paid by each applicant. That's not including penalties and interest. And Mr. Speaker, they're somehow now all of a sudden able to pay this all off in August. They had the money. The enforcement was just not happening. Now they're taking advantage of the fact that they can pay that off without having to incur those interests and penalties. But Mr. Speaker, they have the resources. They're taking care of it by this August. And on an average of $20,000 per applicant, that means that if you were to factor how much in tax revenue how much in gross revenue they actually brought in, if it was adjusted gross income on a tax basis at 35%, that means that they earned $50,000 in income. Or if it was on their gross income at 4%, that means that they earned about $500,000 in gross income. So, Mr. Speaker, it's just not right. It's not right for us to be constantly put into a situation where, as a colleague of mine put it, the crisis is manufactured and we're having to rush into the rescue when these realities paint a very different picture. Until we come down to a true cost that is based on best practices, a level playing field, fairness in tax enforcement, until we can come down to a true cost, we should not be increasing the cost burdens on our people with more taxation. You know, it was mentioned in the budget process earlier in this fiscal year that, as one of my other colleagues mentioned, we need to go out and hire more collection agents, and that's going to help bring in more revenue. And, you know, it does make for a good narrative, and I'm sure there is some truth to that. But, Mr. Speaker, in just today's story, a $250 million grossing company since 2013 was not paying its GRT. How can you miss that? You don't need more staff to catch something like that. And how do you only levy them in 2017, 4 years later? And upon levying them, how do you still not collect up until now? There are staff issues, but there are examples like that that just make us all sit back and say, this all needs to get fixed. The administration needs to invest less money on a press corps pushing out press releases and more time and resources on fixing these problems. And it has nothing to do with politics. It's good government. And when we fix those things, when it is good government, then the people will have faith in the work that we do. The honor of serving in this capacity will mean something. I don't like our people not believing in the leadership that they have, but we need to earn that. And if it means us holding the line and saying we're not going to increase anything until you not only show us what you might do, but actually implement it, then that's what we have to do. If we need to pass a budget that's a 2-month budget, a 1-month budget, that's what we have to do. And if it's what we're going to have to do until we get a new administration into office, then so be it. But our people are going to look to us to be able to fix what they know is broken, not by adding more burden to them, but by doing what they always say. Can't you guys just work together? Well, yeah, we can work together. We will help find out how to get more revenue in when, at the same time, at the executive level, we have demonstrated an ability to contain these costs and bring down the expenses as much as possible so that it's reasonable, so that we're not looking at all of these egregious examples of malfeasance. Isn't even a decent enough term for it. It's just really bad. So I thank my colleagues for expressing support of this repeal of the sales tax. I pray, Mr. Speaker, that our people don't ever have to go through something like this again. It's just not good for Guam. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file, is there an objection? Take a short recess. Legislature's back in order. Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move that we act on Bill 262 without engrossment.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, will the clerk please call roll? Read the title, yeah.
Bill number 262-34 COR, as corrected by the Prime Sponsor and amended by the Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation, introduced by Michael F. Q. Nicholas, an act to repeal sections 1, 3, 4, 16, 17, and 18, and to amend section 2, all of Public Law 34-87, relative to repealing the imposition of a general sales tax in Guam.
Roll call.
Senator Atta. Senator Atta, aye. Senator Uggan. Senator Uggan, aye. Senator Castro. Senator Castro, pass. Speaker Cruz. Speaker Cruz, aye. I'm sorry. Speaker Cruz, pass. Senator Espadon. Senator Espadon, pass. Senator Esteves. Senator Esteves, aye. Senator Lee. Senator Lee, aye. Senator Morrison. Senator Morrison, pass. Senator Muñoz. Senator Muñoz, pass. Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, aye. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, aye. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, aye. Senator San Nicolas. Senator San Nicolas, aye. Vice Speaker Terlahi. Vice Speaker Terlahi, aye. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, aye. Senator Castro. Senator Castro, nay. Speaker Cruz. Speaker Cruz, pass. Senator Espadon. Senator Espadon, pass. Senator Morrison. Senator Morrison, pass. Senator Muñoz. Senator Muñoz, pass. Speaker Cruz. Speaker Cruz, nay. Senator Espadon. Senator Espadon, aye. Senator Morrison. Senator Morrison, nay. Senator Muñoz. Senator Muñoz, nay.
Bill 262-34 COR received 11 ayes, 4 nays. Bill 262-34 is hereby passed by the body. We'll take a short recess. We're in second reading again. We're 270. Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move for the placement of Bill number 270, that's 34 COR, into third reading file, please.
Any objection? Hearing none. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is Bill 270-34 relative to restoring the liquid fuel tax rates that existed prior to the enactment of Public Law number 34-44. And Mr. Speaker, I presented this, I'm asking our colleagues for your support in regards to the enactment of this legislation, primarily because much has been mentioned with the previous legislation, but much can still be said about the increasing costs of living here on our island. And some of the things that I mentioned a little earlier was, you look at the cost of fuel, which is something that many families need in terms of being able to either take their children to school, go to work. Our everyday people need and use and purchase fuel. That has increased since January by 10.22%. We also did realize as a community the increase in the water rates back in February. In conjunction with that, the power rates also increased in February, and then subsequently with another increment in May, and that was as it applies to the LEAC rate. Then we also have heard, Mr. Speaker, that GWA is also looking at incremental increases for the next several years to be able to address some of their upgrades. And that's in anticipation of their review and implementation of any rate increase. Also, GPA was under active discussion within the last month about further adjusting the LEAC rate, and they decided to suspend any further discussion until January of 2019. But they did come out with a statement recognizing that the LEAC rate, based on their cost structure, that they have lost already millions of dollars as it applies to moving forward, and they will revisit that in January. We mentioned about the BPT adjustment, Mr. Speaker, and that was discussed somewhat with the previous legislation. And I mentioned there's one particular product that I had tracked since February, and it already has increased by 13.9%. So we've seen all of these increases impacting the entire community. Mr. Speaker, someone may come up and say, yes, but it's being utilized specifically to repair secondary and tertiary roads. Let me say this. I support the repair of secondary and tertiary roads, but not at the expense of burdening, or not at the expense of burdening our families even more. When I say that, Mr. Speaker, since January 1st, I recognize that between January 1st and the end of June, that $1.75 million should have been realized. by virtue of the existing rate structure that would go directly towards the repair of secondary and tertiary roads. And then, perhaps one of the comments would be, but this year, the administration's investing or expending about $3 million, $3.8 million. Well, $2 million of that came from compact impact funds, from federal sources. There's nothing that forgoes or restricts the governor of Guam from finding or utilizing the same funding source so that we can have an equivalent level of funding for the repair of other roads in our community. Mr. Speaker, it really comes down to what I shared a little earlier and then also now, is this government should not be in a situation to burden our families, the very same individuals and families that we continue to try to advocate for. On the one hand, taxes are increased. On the other hand, we say we need to allocate more resources. Well, there are other ways to identify these funds. And it was through federal sources, which is one option, collection of outstanding tax receivables, which is another option, and also looking at other ways in terms of generating revenue. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask our colleagues for your consideration in the repeal of the fuel tax rate that was adjusted as a result of the passage of Public Law 34-44. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. On the main motion, any senator wish to be heard? Senator Morrison?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to register my opposition to Bill 270, which seeks to repeal Public Law 34-44. For quick reference, this was introduced on June 22nd, 2017, Public Law 3044. Publicly heard on July 10, 2017, passed by a vote of 8-7 on September 29, 2017, signed into law by the governor on October 12, 2017, and became effective on January 1st, 2018. The Office of the Attorney General issued an opinion on January 19, 2018, responding to a question of whether a voter referendum is required to raise taxes. The AG provided a statement or opinion that the raising of taxes and fees is essential to the operation of government, even though the amounts are discretionary. The Organic Act has given the authority to perform this essential function to the legislature. Thus, it appears that requiring a vote of the electorate to raise fees for the government services is beyond the scope of the legislature's authority to delegate. Mr. Speaker, Public Law 34-44 adjusted the liquid fuels tax by 4 cents in order to fund more road repairs. Projects that were identified in the 2009 master plan, which is total cost estimated about $1 billion to completely fund the master plan. Right here's the master plan, Mr. Chair. I don't know if any of you have seen what this document looks like, but it's right here. I've had this in my office for quite some time. I knew about it since the Camacho administration. It's been sitting on shelves, and there has been no action to how we best address it or provide resources to get this plan or start chipping away and moving this plan forward. The debate on Public Law 34-44 included suggestions for an additional 6 cents increase, as a 4 cent increase proposed by a measure was referred to by a community advocate during the public hearing as a weak or timid, considering the occasional 10 or the 28-cent adjustment made by fuel companies at that time. Despite the suggestion, the legislature cautiously moved forward with a 4-cent adjustment, which DPW anticipates will bring in an additional $3.5 million annually for road repairs and construction projects. As of April of this year, according to DPW, the following roads were being prepared: for repairs, with a number of them already completed as of today, and the final project, Street in Assen, J Street in Assen, was scheduled to be completed on June 19, 2018. Here are the list of projects, Mr. Speaker, that have been being worked on. Gilbreeze Jigo, Santate Lane, PD, Biang Street, Mongmong, Pali Kaden, Sinhanya, Dueña Street at Agat, Federico Street, Aganya Heights, Jose A. Canata Street, Umatic, Gadzuman Street, Barragata, Namofo, Santa Rita, Polino Heights Street, or Polino Heights, Talafofo, Asaguero, Zortnia, Salan Anona Street, Ordon Chalapago, Tunun Kikut Fehe Street, Manilao, Demetrio Q, Manuel Street, Mariso, Route 4, Belly Street, and Lago intersection in Iran, San Careta Street, Darilo, Padre Palomo Street, Hagatnya, Carmen Memorial Drive, and Censo Field Street, Maina. As of May 31st, 2018, a new list of road repairs issued by DPW has a total estimate to cost about $2.25 million and is based on 3 worst roads in the village streets or as identified in the 2010 Village Streets Master Plan. And here are the list, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. Chalon, Fungo, Jigo, Assumption Drive, PD, Maninabusan Street, Mongbong Toto Maiti, Pagatsao Drive, Agat, Francisco Javier Avenue, Aganya Heights, Jesus Kiritai Street, Umatic, Lizama Street, Barragata, Salanpali, Dueñas, Ajat, Santa Rita, Francisco Regis Avenue, Talafofo, Salanazuzu, Zortnia, Naki Street, Ordon, Chalampago, Lalu Avenue, Manilao, Espinosa Avenue, Mariso, Don Santiago Polino Street, or Lane, in Arahan, Salan Lamasu y Buridan, Palatat, Derido, 9th Street, Hagatnya, Cruz Lane, Tamuni, Maria Candelaria Street, Assen. There's a lot of work been going on, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, and there's a lot of work being planned forward. There's a lot of activity taking on the work of DPW as we see clearly out there. Future legislatures must continue providing for the responsible transition of obligations unrelated to the Guam Highway Fund to the general fund, as the 34th Guam Legislature did through the FY 2018 budget law, by transitioning certain non-highway obligations such as UOG and GCC to the Territorial Education Facilities Fund, freeing up resources for more road repairs. Unfortunately, a significant portion of Guam Highway Fund, which is supported by the liquid fuels tax, associated surcharge and fees, continues to be used for non-highway obligations. In FY 2016, the fund received approximately $20 million, with a little more than half of that amount committed for highway and transportation-related services provided by DPW. The remaining funds were used to support non-highway and non-transportation-related commitments involving DOE at $4.7 million, the General Fund at $2.3 million, the Mayor's Council of Guam $2.1 million, and the Better Public Service Fund at $955,000, and UOG and GCC at $779,000. Absent a responsible transition of support for non-highway, non-transportation related obligations from the Guam Highway Fund to the General Fund, it will continue to be difficult for the government to fix Guam's roads. Fuel prices continue to fluctuate nationally with higher demand and the effects of the geopolitical issues. Even with non-highway and non-transportation funding issues aside, there still aren't enough resources available to address the increasing demands placed on our roadways, regardless if all proceeds from the Guam Highway Fund are even if all highway funds were given to DPW to fix more roads. Mr. Speaker, Bill 270-34, which seeks to repeal the liquid fuel tax adjustment introduced on April 11, 2018, 6 months after Public Law 34-44 was signed into law, is nothing else but a question of whether this legislature, where the people of Guam, want to make our roads safer. The answer is either yes or no. Does this legislature, do the people of Guam for that matter, want unsafe roads? Do we want to put the Vaughan Village Streets Master Plan back on the shelf so that it can collect more dust? The answer, Mr. Speaker, is yes or no. Do we want to continue ignoring requests by DPW every year during its budget hearings for resources to fix roads? Do we continue holding roundtable meetings with DPW and community stakeholders, as we did in the early part of 2017, and propose solutions to this important issues, such as Bill 7, which would have prioritized funding for road repairs to the annual budget law, just as we do for tax refunds, or Bill 36, authored by you, Mr. Speaker, which would have authorized the issuance of limited obligation highway bonds for village streets and road projects, and then at the end, pull the brakes when the process takes effect, or is being made. As I conclude my remarks, Mr. Speaker, on Bill 270, please allow me to read a portion of an article that was published by a local newspaper in February of 2017 about the unsafe road conditions at Gil Breeze in Jigo. Joy Cabral is a working mom with a family of 8 to care for. On weekdays, the Jigo resident gets up early in the morning, helps her kids to get ready for school, heads to work in Santa Rita, and then goes back home to tend to her children. The commute seems long by Guam standards, but the difficulty comes at the start of her travels. Cabral lives in the Gil Breeze subdivision on a road adjacent to Lucas Sablan Boulevard. Lucas Sablan Boulevard is an unpaved, bumpy stretch of road with an incline. Drivers with small cars have to zigzag past slopes and holes to make it to the other side of the road without damaging their vehicles. Even bigger cars still have to slow down. Buses can't traverse the road at all. Since Cabral lives at the end of this road, she has no choice but to use it when she wants to go to work, buy groceries, or do other errands. You're not going to believe me when I say I have had to get my tires replaced 3 times in 1 year because of this road, Cabral said. She has lived in the area for 17 years and said that little has been done to address the condition of the road. There also are no streetlights on this path, so it becomes difficult to drive through it early in the morning or daylight or at night. I sent a request 2 years ago to get some lights here. Nothing yet, Cabral said. Jigo Mayor Rudy Mantanani on Friday assured that there has been progress on streetlight installation. He said the project has been authorized and is going through the proper channels for the lights to be installed. Still, Cabral has been waiting for work to be done. She said she often speaks to the mayor about issues in the area, and the mayor does what he can to help. Cabral's persistence stems from her concern for the youths in the subdivision. Our children are suffering every day when they walk around this road, Cabral said. The nearest bus stop is at the bottom of the road, about a quarter mile away from Cabral's house. Take into account loose rocks and unleveled footing and the route to the bus stop seems more unsafe. 9-year-old Michelle Iracular said she wakes up at 4:30 a.m. to get ready for school. The Guam Academy charter school student is driven down the bumpy road to the bus stop by her parents most of the time. But there are occasions when she has to walk down. It's tiring, she said, and we have to watch out for the cars coming up to them. She is among dozens of school children in the area who make the trek down to the bus stop. Michelle's father, Gregory Iracular, shares the same concerns as Cabral. Father of 8 and has lived in the area for 4 years. He has seen not just them suffer, has seen many of these residents suffer because of this road. There's more than 20 families who live here. We're all affected by it. Mayor Mantanani said that if funds were available, he would prioritize these road repairs. He listed the Gil Breeze Road as one of the top roads in his village in dire need of fixing. Each village mayor submitted a list of roads along with the length and the cost to repair to the form of a master list that the legislature and the Guam Department of Public Works would review. Public Works estimated the cost of each of the village roads. The list will be considered while Speaker Benjamin Cruz is drafting legislation to borrow $50 million from the bond market to repair roads. In terms of costs, Public Works noted that more than $750,000 would be needed to fix the 1,056 feet of road in Gil Breeze. Wherever the government gets the funds, Cabral said, she wants the road to be fixed. We need help, Cabral pleaded. We're only human beings. Mr. Speaker, this is Gil Breeze. I'm not sure if any of you know where Gil Breeze subdivision is, but I think some of you may have taken a drive down or visited the site. And these are before and after photos that were provided for us by a media outlet. If anybody wants to see these roads, these are real situations out there, Mr. Speaker. Basic access. The pictures that I was holding up, Mr. Speaker, are from a local speaker, as I mentioned earlier. I want to thank the leadership of this administration, the mayor. I want to thank you also, Mr. Speaker, and those who were involved who raised these concerns. Team DPW, and most importantly, to the families of Gil Breeze who lived with dangerous roads for many, many years and were willing to share their struggles with the rest of us. We know that unsafe roads isn't isolated to Gil Breeze. We know of other streets throughout our villages that need the same attention, the same resources, if not more, so that our roads become safer for our families, especially our young children who walk distances to and from bus shelters, regardless if it is a nice, bright day or when it's pouring rain. Short of swimming, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if you recall, when that road, when it poured, those students, those children literally were halfway damped or their clothes are wet trying to get to school. I respectfully ask my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, to keep Public Law 34 intact. The difference here, as compared to what we discussed earlier with the sales tax repeal, this has taken effect. Work is ongoing. Critical roads are being worked on. And I think as we drive around the island, we're seeing Team DPW start to get to work. One of my colleagues pointed out or ask the question, what would it take to keep DPW busy year-long? Because we know for a fact, just based on this master plan here, it's going to take a while to address the entire master plan, but we kind of sort of watered it down to about $70 million that we identified that we can get to, that are the 3 top needed roads, and working closely with our mayors and council members. So I understand the author of this measure, but we are right in the middle of moving forward to phase 2 of the rest of these streets that need to get repaired. I can't control market forces out there, Mr. Speaker, that drive up these prices. And certainly what all we're doing is trying to take a small piece of this liquid fuels tax, or this, what we would need to get to our destinations using fuel to help with these repairs. I'm very concerned that we may, I'm sure now how this will work, Mr. Speaker. A lot of these projects have been lined up, and I think they've worked closely with vendors to earmark certain projects that are mentioned in this Village Street Master List, and there's work ongoing. And like I said, I pointed out when the bill was introduced 6 months after this measure passed, and things have been planning forward. And again, I can't predict the price tomorrow. I can't predict what fuels will do. I don't know, the geopolitical issues out there. We don't know what happened tomorrow. The liquid fuels tax, my understanding, was never adjusted. I believe it was adequate for the time of maybe the 70s and the 80s to meet the demands of that time, with the demand of of our community. But we know clearly there is a larger population in this community. There's more vehicles out there, more heavy equipment. There's people that need access to their homes. Certainly, as pointed out, there's a lot of other roads that I can mention that are just like Gilbreeze, but I won't go there. But I just want to make sure that my colleagues keep Public Law 34 intact. It's critical. I mean, basic access, Mr. Speaker, and for our people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Ada, and after Senator Ada, any other senator wish to be recognized? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to Bill 270-34. The liquid fuel tax was initially enacted back in 1953, so certainly this is not a new concept, and it's not something that's unique to Guam. It is a tax that is placed on vehicle owners as a way to be able to generate revenues to maintain the roads that we travel on. Now, just how long this 10 cents per gallon, for example, for diesel, 11 cents per gallon for gasoline, and 4 cents per gallon for aviation fuel has been in place since the liquid fuel tax has been enacted, I'm not sure if it's had any adjustment between 1953 and 1998. We do know that Public Law 24-205, when that was enacted, it stated in there the fuel tax rates at that time, which was the 10 cents, 11 cents, and 4 cents. Now, in June of last year, when the bill was passed to increase these fuel rates, it increased those fuel rates by 50%. That sounds outrageous. But of course, mathematically, If you start with a low number, so if it was for 1 cent and you increase it to 2 cents, that's a 100% increase. So that's just the way it appears. So the fees were increased by approximately 50% last year and took effect in January of this year. Now, 20 years ago, cars were not as fuel efficient. And at the time, you had the big engines, the V8, and certainly that consumed a lot more fuel. And so the revenue, the liquid fuel tax revenues were certainly a lot more. And but over the years, certainly 20 years later, we find that cars are certainly a lot more fuel efficient, and we start seeing the fuel cells decrease. And again, that's not unique to Guam. That's a phenomenon that's occurring throughout the nation, and even they are trying to figure out, so how do we offset the decreasing fuel tax revenue so that they can maintain their roads? And in many states, having to increase the liquid fuel tax certainly is how that particular issue is being addressed. Now, the Federal Highway Administration provides to GovGuam approximately $15 to $16 million a year to be able to undertake significant capital improvement projects on our highways, such as the repair of our bridges that were constructed decades ago. And so the annual federal funds that we get and supplemented by the defense funds as part of the military buildup certainly were used to be able to undertake those capital improvement projects. The road widening projects to relieve some of the congestion certainly were funded by the Federal Highway Administration. But the understanding is that after those projects are undertaken, it is really up to the local government to be able to maintain these roads. Route 1, all your numbered routes, it is the local government's responsibility to maintain those. And then, of course, in addition to that, we have the secondary and tertiary roads in the villages that do need to be repaired, to be widened, so that villagers, as the villages grow, you need to widen those roads, and we do need to maintain them. And so, as the fuel tax revenues decrease, the ability, of course, to be able to perform those maintenance responsibilities becomes less and less. And so we start seeing more potholes, and we continue to have to then travel on narrow secondary roads and tertiary roads. Now, it's important that we maintain our roads, not just for the comfort of being able to drive, from point A to point B without, losing half of your hubcaps and all that, but it's a lot more than just the comfort of that ride. I think it could be argued that well-maintained roads certainly contribute to the safety of that travel, so that cars are not having to swerve to avoid potholes, and so certainly that's very important in this community as we travel on our highways to get from point A to point B. So we need to maintain our roads, and we don't have really a public transit system that might be able to provide that alternative transportation. And so we've got to maintain those assets. In addition to having well-maintained roads, that will contribute to a reduced maintenance costs of our vehicles. The speaker that preceded me was reading a story about the lady who had to replace her tires 3 times in 1 year. Whereas tires are supposed to get 50,000 miles on it. That's about a 5-year life on tires. But if you have to replace it 3 times a year because the roads are not being maintained, then we're adding to the expense of our folks in the community to be able to maintain some mobility. Now, I guess the comment was made that, let's roll back this, the liquid fuel tax to where it was 20 years ago, and we can find the money elsewhere. Well, I hope that that maybe some suggestions will be given during the course of the discourse on Bill 270 as to where are we going to find this money, because everybody's looking for money for everything else. But it's important that we maintain our roads. I remember many years ago, the big thing to get elected was, we're going to keep your utility rates down. And sure enough, that election promise was kept, and sure enough, that individual was reelected. But at the same time, our utilities continued to deteriorate until the point when the federal government stepped in and was this close to putting our utilities into receivership. Now, I hope that we don't get to the point, and I hope that we've learned lessons from that if we don't put in the necessary maintenance into our assets, it's going to deteriorate. And it's going to become, we're going to have Gil Breeze roads all over this island. So we've got to be able to maintain our assets, and I certainly oppose Bill 270-34. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other Senator Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the surface, it looks like we need to raise this tax in order to fix our roads, in order to have money in this fund to fix our roads. Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that this tax increase was a fraction of what was already going into that fund from the pre-existing taxes that were much higher. The Guam Highway Fund, Mr. Speaker, prior to enactment of this new tax, was already bringing in about $19 million. Unfortunately, as has been the case in this government, the $19 million that goes into this fund, which is supposed to be used for road repair, was never being used for road repair. We actually wrote a column on it, and I'm going to go ahead and quote from it because it encapsulates it very well. The Guam Highway Fund, which is where the liquid fuel tax goes to now, is supposed to pay for road repairs throughout our island, and $19.1 million was deposited into the fund in fiscal year 2015. We referenced 2015 because that was when this fund was audited. What we found was a poor track record of prioritization, with only $5.1 million of the $19.1 million going directly to fix roads. Of the existing tax, only 1/4 of it was actually going to fix roads. While the remaining 73% went to various GovGuam agencies, including DOE, the Mayor's Council, the Department of Administration, UOG, GCC, and the Department of Revenue and Taxation. And this is according to the audit that was conducted on that 2015 year. Fast forward to this current budget, and the Department of Public Works is actually funded almost entirely by the Guam Highway Fund, with the exception being some of it coming from the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund. I'm assuming that the rationale from pulling from there was because of the school bus operations of DPW. Mr. Speaker, this is just another example of how we're raising taxes in our community because we're not able to prioritize the funding that's already existing for that purpose. We already have $19 million coming into the Guam Highway Fund prior to this tax. What we need to do is work backwards the commitments that these funds have been going to other than roads. I introduced, Mr. Speaker, Bill 151-34. I don't even think it's been reported out. And the whole purpose of that bill was to have a focus of the highway fund specifically for roads. It'll be a road fund only for roads, which means that we have to go back into the budget and figure out how we're going to fund all those other things with other sources. The whole point of these targeted taxes going into these targeted funds is to achieve targeted purposes. Now we're coming back to our people, we're raising their fuel taxes and we're saying, oh, it's because we need money to fix your road. Well, that's what we're supposed to have been doing from the beginning. But because we're not doing that from the beginning, all of a sudden we're raising taxes and then we're going out saying, see, we paved all of these roads, isn't that wonderful? Don't you like your tax increase? Now, wait a minute. If you had been spending the money that was already going into there, you would have been able to pay 4 times as much. So let's not tell our people that we need to make it more expensive for them to drive to their priorities and get food and go to the hospital and take their kids to school. And we need to make that drive more expensive by raising your fuel taxes so we can fix your roads. Let's not be telling them that, when the reality is that there's already money there. We just need to prioritize how we're spending it. One of the biggest challenges in budgeting, Mr. Speaker, isn't in appropriating. That's the easy part. It's in walking things backwards, walking things back. And if somebody were to really, just even a layperson look at our budget, not just on what's being appropriated and from where, but really analyze how money comes in and where it goes and how it goes out, oh my goodness. You know, it makes you want to just sit back and say, I think we got to redraw this whole diagram. You know, for example, you have a gross receipts tax come in. Already 2% of that off the top is supposed to go into the pharmaceutical fund. And the pharmaceutical fund is now being used to match Medicaid, but in the prior times it's been used to fund GMH. But since we've reprioritized that into funding Medicaid, of which only 30 cents on the dollar gets to GMH, now GMH is getting a 30% subsidy when it used to be getting a 100% subsidy from the pharmaceutical fund monies. And that's just 2% of the GRT off the top. You look at the highway fund, you have these taxes per gallon that's getting split between 5 different agencies, and only 25 cents on the dollar is actually going to fix roads. It's no wonder we're saying, oh, we need to raise taxes. If we keep the priorities prioritized, we won't need to do that. But it's when we start getting a little creative one way and then a little creative the next, and then all of a sudden you have a budget that looks like ours that you just sit back and you say, no wonder we're struggling to just try and keep things going. It's gotten so convoluted. And so instead of raising taxes on our people, we need to walk these things back. We need to really ask ourselves, do we need dozens and dozens of special funds? Or should things be considered more along the general fund revenue side? I mean, if the governor is already pulling from special funds anyway, and the auditor is celebrating it as a surplus, then are we really fixing things, or are we just adding to the confusion and making our people just frustrated? And in the end, is all that confusion and frustration just ending up hurting people because we're raising taxes, because we're not prioritizing? So I support Bill 270-34. for the mere fact that we shouldn't be increasing the fuel tax when we already have $19 million going into the road fund and we're not using all of that money for roads. We're basically raising taxes to subsidize those other operations, not to fix roads. That money's already there. But it's a good crutch. Okay, we're raising the gas tax to fix the road. No, you're taking road money for other things and you're raising the gas tax to kind of paper that over. So until we work all of that back, Mr. Speaker, we really should not be increasing the taxes on our people. And I don't want to seem like I'm just an anti-revenue guy, but I mean, there's a time and a place to be doing certain things. And you don't raise gas taxes to get road money when you're misspending or you're spending the road money in other places. Let's refocus that road money. And instead of raising the gas tax, we have organic growth in our budget. Let's prioritize it into those other things and work those things back. And then we can say that we're fully funding road repair with highway fund money. And that's just one example. We have a lot of special funds. And I've looked at them and I'm like, wow, the Healthy Futures Fund is another example. You know, I won't mention the organization, but one of the organizations that gets funded by the Healthy Futures Fund came by my office and dropped off a whole stack of posters and lanyards and bracelets, and I'm like, that could go buy bandages, you know? So, and that's I think one of the gross inefficiencies of government. You know, you hear people say you can't run government like a business. And yeah, you know, there isn't really a profit center, but you certainly can control your losses, and you definitely can seek to achieve a return on your investment. And that's something that we need to become more mindful of before we're raising taxes, because when we do this in a community like ours that already has a struggling cost of living, or fixing a road that people can't even afford to drive on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to point out a couple of things regarding this particular increase in the liquid fuels tax. This is the first increase in the liquid fuels tax in many, many years, as pointed out by earlier speakers. The liquid fuels tax is specifically, it goes to the highway fund, which is specifically dedicated for certain purposes, including, of course, maintenance of the highways. And other money also goes into the highway fund. And because the highway fund goes to maintenance of the roads, it goes to street lights, it goes in part to better services by GPD. And I just want to point out that it is true. I've seen in prior legislatures that the money in the highway fund has been used for things other than street repair or street lights, public transportation, which is the other goal of this highway fund, is to take care of public transportation, including mass transit. But I think that during this term, that this legislature has tried hard to work it back, as the previous speaker said, and limit the use of the highway funds to purposes allowed by the highway fund statute. And so I went and looked through all of these, and the part of the $18,000 of this highway fund, it was appropriated to the Department of Administration, but that was specifically for the audit of the Government of Guam's highway fund. part went to DOA to pay GPA for the operation of public streetlights. A bulk of it goes to, well, I take it back, not even a bulk of it. Well, yes, a bulk of it goes to Department of Public Works, obviously. Public Works, part of this money goes to Public Works operations. 1.8 million of it goes specifically to village streets resurfacing and repairs. But the part that goes to operations, my understanding, and I went to every public hearing so that I could be very clear about this and understand exactly. Now, I agree there may be room for improvement. However, if we fund DPW employees to repair these streets and give them enough money for the materials that they need, that is the most efficient way to repair the streets. And that is what the Department of Public Works Director has said consistently since the first hearing on a liquid fuels tax bill, you know, maybe in one of our first months, when we were over at the old building before we moved here in March. So he has said that is the most efficient way to go. You fund the Public Works employees and you let them do it in-house. So part of the Guam Highway Fund goes to Public Works employees operations, and part of it goes specifically to the resurfacing. Part of the highway fund, like I said earlier, goes to the police department, 1.5 million. That was for the highway patrol division specifically. 3 million goes to the Guam Regional Transit Authority. Now, I think we can all agree that the mass transit system maybe needs, you know, we need to dedicate time to resolve the issues that are ongoing with the mass transit system. And however, in the interim, we are continuing to fund the mass transit system unless somebody is going to make an amendment in the next budget cycle to remove any funding towards this mass transit system or to do anything else. And I think that's really where it needs to be done, is in the budget cycle, is to dictate where this money is going to go. But I am very happy that this year the money is not going towards purposes outside of what it was originally intended for. It's going to highway fund purposes. It additionally, 5 million of this goes to the Mayor's Council for it looks like I'm not sure if this is a limited, how the mayors can use it or not, but I do know that we do have statutes that require the mayors, that they are also responsible for, they have exclusive responsibility for performing general minor repair and maintenance work not to exceed 5,000, such as cleaning, painting, plumbing, trash collection, landscape maintenance, upkeep of drainage facilities, planting trees, plants and flowers, maintenance of street light signs, and replacement of street lights. And this is also from the audit. The most important factor in this discussion, Mr. Speaker, I think is what an earlier speaker pointed out when he picked up his big binder that showed the mass transit plan, or the road repair plan. And DPW has also said this consistently, and so I want to give them credit for this, that this plan, the Village Streets Master Plan, encompasses, it's a plan to repair 860 miles of roads on Guam. That's the conclusion of a survey, a study that we paid a lot of money, apparently, to come up with. 860 miles, it would cost $746 million. And so, obviously, since that was done, and I think he said it was, he didn't say the year, but he said it was during the Camacho administration, so at least 7, 8 years ago, at the very least, that study was done, and we've barely made a dent in the 860 miles of roads. So I want to give DPW some credit for actually getting some of that compact impact money and thank you to the governor for allocating compact impact money towards roads, because he has a lot of discretion as to where that is going to go. And so we've had some roads repaired, and we've had some roads repaired pursuant to our regular appropriation, but this, the roads that DPW has been able to repair in this round one cost 1.5 outside of the compact impact money, just using the appropriations that we have given them, the 1.58 million, 2 miles of roads. And they have a plan to do another 2.25 miles of roads. But this is, they've got lists of 19 roads. So each phase around round one and round two are approximately 19 roads each. They're picking projects from each village, trying to prioritize. All of these projects are on the Village Streets Master Plan, but they're also prioritized by the mayors as to which ones are, you know, the biggest safety concerns or at that time. But we're still only making an impact on 2 miles total of roads out of 860 miles of roads. It's unfortunate, I worry a little bit that the tax actually went in, the increased liquid fuels tax went into effect, but I've never been able to get a clear answer from anyone of these public hearings where this money is right now. Apparently, we did not succeed in locking it up when we tried to make that floor amendment on the floor. That didn't pass. And so it should be going into the Guam Highway Fund, but you know, after all this revelation of the use of special funds, I want to make sure that this money is dedicated to its purpose also, and that it should be used specifically for road projects. So I'm still hoping that a bill that I introduced would have a hearing that dedicates that the additional tax that has been accumulating to specific road projects. And these are the projects that the list came from DPW in consultation with the mayors. And again, it addresses the Village Streets Master Plan. So I do think that the legislature, there is always more that we can do to ensure that these special funds are actually being used for their purposes. And I think we have done that, and we need to continue to do that. And we need to make sure that even this additional money, that it is going to its purpose right now. When we first voted on this bill, the underlying bill that we're now debating whether to repeal, the estimate was approximately $6 per month extra that you would be paying for the additional 4 cents. It is not the equivalent of the 10% increase in gas prices, and I just also want to make a point. I do not agree with the gas companies in continuing to raise their prices. I stand united with everyone on this floor that says, you know, we've got to do everything we can to stop that the people of Guam are going to pay more for gas than everywhere else in the world. But I think that the government of Guam is going to get from those people who use the roads, this percentage is consistent with national policy, and that this amount, I think at the last hearing, the estimate was $33 a year. Now that is significant, but I think when we look at the state of our roads and we look at the progress that we are able to make on these roads, and it's very, very clear to me that there is not going to be any other funding source that's going to be dedicated for roads. There hasn't been one dedicated for roads in the past, I don't know how many years. And it's been the opposite. They've taken money away from roads. So I want to make sure the money goes to the roads, and that the people, you know, I just have to say too, this is something I hear very often. People really and I agree, it's a safety concern, the roads. I mean, they have to at least be safe. And so they don't have to be fancy, in my opinion. You know, I'll leave that to the experts. But they do have to be safe. They have to be marked. They have, the potholes cannot, you know, steer our cars off. And we have to get to safety as fast as possible. And it seems so daunting to me to take care of this list of roads that have been declared in need. They're not, you know, I think, luxurious projects to fix roads. I think these are very, very necessary, and that this tax is very, I think we're going to have to look at the other side of it. Is during the budget process, if we're going to continue to put money into mass transit, we've got to make sure that it's going to work, and it's going to work for all. And then when we put money to DPW, that they have what they need to finish these roads. And so I want to give them credit for the roads that they have done, Mr. Speaker, and I just wanted to put those things on the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Uggan, you're welcome to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly appreciate the perspective of our colleagues. You know, Mr. Speaker, when you take a look at the so-called fear tactic about this is no longer going to result in paving of secondary and tertiary roads. The 1.75, even the previous speaker had questioned whether in fact the 1.75, which has been generated since January 1st to the end of June, approximately, based on the $3.5 million estimate, whether in fact that money is actually there. So that tells me, Mr. Speaker, that this is about cash management. Is about whether, in fact, the money that is allocated for the Guam Highway Fund is used to fix roads. Just for the information of everyone here, the road project for Phase 1 was funded with $1.8 million allocated out of the Guam Highway Fund by this legislative body in fiscal year 18 budget. $2 million was added by the governor by virtue of federal funds. So $3.8 million has been utilized. In this case, it's kind of interesting that if paving roads were a priority, we had to wait until the 8th year of an administration to be able to start paving roads? You ask yourself that question. And then, Mr. Speaker, there's been reference to the 2009 Village Streets Master Plan and about all those roads that have been identified. Mr. Speaker, it was reviewed in a discussion that 75% of the roads, the 19 roads in Phase 1, were not even Priority 1, Priority 2, Priority 3 in the different villages. So you tell me, now that you're asking to retain money off the backs of our people, you're saying we're going to now apply the use of the Village Streets Master Plan. And the reason why that's important, Mr. Speaker, is that this study identified critical roads that were safety hazards. There was a matrix that was applied in terms of which roads needed more urgent care or immediate repair versus other roads, and they were given a certain priority per village. That's why the Village Streets Master Plan is a critical document that should have been followed since day one. So you ask yourself that question, Mr. Speaker, whether in fact repairing village streets was a priority in terms of the sense of urgency and the prioritization out of the Village Streets Master Plan. Secondly, if you take a look at Division of Highway that is funded out of the Guam Highway Fund, it was even admitted that 65% plus is dedicated towards personnel. That's an evolution, Mr. Speaker. Over the last 10 to 12 years, it was a much lower percentage. But what has the leadership in DPW done over the past few years is started to offset the cost and start using the special funds rather than using the funds to be able to repair the roads, which we're all advocating for here, to repair the secondary and the tertiary roads for the safety of our people. So, Mr. Speaker, those are questions that we need to ask ourselves. And there was another statement that was saying, okay, so if we don't take it out of the Guam Highway Fund by assessing or retaining this particular fee, where are we going to get the money? Well, this bill is about not off the backs of our people. That's what Bill 270, that's 34 COR, says. If in fact it's enacted into law, not off the backs of our people. One of our colleagues, the previous speaker, said we need to work backwards and make sure that we prioritize the use of these funds because it's supposed to be utilized for the repair of secondary and tertiary roads. And I agree. Let's work backwards, but not, Mr. Speaker, on the backs of our people and ask them to continue to pay for something that they've already paid. They've already been paying. Doesn't matter if it's a 10-year law or fee. Doesn't matter if it's a 20-year fee. The issue here is cash management and the expenditure of these funds based on what they were originally intended for by law. That's the question here. You know, Mr. Speaker, it really comes down again to how these resources are being expended. I mentioned a little earlier, and it's kind of interesting because I mentioned a little earlier that this government has committed in excess of $10 to $12 million in additional personnel costs since the beginning of this fiscal year. Approximately $10 to $12 million. Additional personnel costs. So where could the money have come from? It could have come, part of it could have come from that, for the repair of roads. Approximately $25 million is going to be generated as a result of the tax amnesty program. Where could the money have come from? Could have originated from some of those proceeds that are generated as a result of the tax amnesty. So don't question, or at least from my perspective, ask me where the money's going to come from, when in fact there's some serious cash management activities and decisions that are being made that is not consistent with the law. So if $1.75 million has been generated so far since January 1st to June 30th, then, Mr. Speaker, there has been no authorization, no appropriation to expend those funds, then we should have $1.75 million accumulated in the Guam Highway Fund, specifically available for this body to appropriate and to authorize for the repair of roads. That's what I'm talking about, Mr. Speaker. It's about making sure that if we say these resources are allocated specifically to repair roads for the safety of our people, that they are used for that particular purpose. And I mentioned again, Mr. Speaker, about the increasing allocation and use of the Guam Highway Fund for personnel in DPW. These individuals, Mr. Speaker, they should never be caught in the middle of the discussion or the debate on how funds are expended. Because these individuals, the career classified employees of our government, inclusive of DPW, are doing the best they possibly can with the resources that are being provided to them by leadership. It is the leadership that is being questioned about the use and the application of the Guam Highway Fund for purposes other than what is designated by law. So, Mr. Speaker, we've heard from a number of our colleagues, and I appreciate the perspective. We differ, because I am not about ready to continue to advocate for placing the burden on the backs of our people when we as government leaders or this government is not allocating or prioritizing the use of special funds and the expenditure of public funds, especially in light of the so-called financial restraints or condition that this government is presently in. So, Mr. Speaker, with that said, I ask our colleagues for your consideration to support Bill number 270-34 COR, and let's ensure that this government and this legislative body no longer adds additional burden to our people, and let's work these financial challenges out. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file, any objection? We stand in recess until 9 tomorrow morning.